Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, I hope you're well, inshallah. So welcome to this new series of videos, No Confusion Necessary. Now in this series, what we're going to be doing is removing the distortions and misconceptions that surround Islam and presenting a positive case for Islam and positive argumentations that support the Islamic worldview. On today's show, we've got Brother Hamza Sortes. Assalamu alaikum, bro.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah.
Good, mashallah. So, I guess what we're talking about in this show, the first topic is consciousness and how it's best explained by God's existence. So maybe take it away and break it down for us, inshallah.
Well, consciousness is an interesting reality. Now, consciousness has provided a lot of problems for the atheist, for the reductionist, for the scientist, for the materialist, which are a bunch of people, if you like, who want to reduce everything to matter, essentially. Now, the reason it's created a problem, not because we have an ability to think, not because we can retrieve memories or we can feel pain. These are easy issues in the field of consciousness. The reason it is very difficult for people to explain consciousness comprehensively is because something called the hard problem of consciousness.
Okay.
Now, the hard problem of consciousness, as coined by Professor David Chalmers and many other academics, is what it is to be like. Let me give you an example. What's your favorite fruit, bro?
Mangoes.
Mangoes. You love mangoes,
Mangoes,
right?
okay.
I love mangoes too, especially Pakistani mangoes.
Oh yeah, in season.
In season, of course. So, say you're eating a mango, a Pakistani mango. Now, materialists or scientists or reductionists may be able to find out you're eating, it's a fruit, and you find it sweet, just by looking at the neurochemical activity in the brain,
Right,
what's
okay.
happening in the brain. But they will never be able to tell you or me or anybody else what it is like for Imran to eat a mango.
So there's this distinction here. So they can probably tell you that you're actually eating something and you're enjoying something, but they can't tell you how it feels to you personally.
Exactly. This is called the inner subjective experience of the human being. And since there are inner subjective experiences for the human being, which translates to the hard problem of consciousness, all types of worldviews, or the philosophies that try to explain the inner subjective experience can't explain it adequately. For example, we have something called type A materialism, also known as monism, now, or monistic materialism. Now, what they basically say is that when we know everything about brain processes and the biology of the brain, then we'll know everything about consciousness. But this is not true. Because if I were to know everything about your brain from a biological scientific perspective, map out all the neurochemical activity, the entire kind of structure of your brain, we could never infer, we could never reason or find out what it is like for Imran to fall in love, what it is like for Imran to have a gourmet coffee, what it is like for Imran to enjoy a chocolate cake, what it is like for Imran to feel pain, what it is like for Imran to feel chilled out and relaxed. This inner subjective conscious experience is outside of the scope of the materialistic reductionist paradigm, if you like.
Sure. So is this why it's an issue for atheism as well, if I'm correct?
It's a huge issue for atheism, because if atheists adopt naturalism and materialism, which basically essentially says that the universe is like a closed box, all phenomena can be explained physically or via materialism. If that is the case, then it provides a huge problem, because think about it, if the entire universe is just a rearrangement of chunks of matter, then how can these chunks of matter give us these inner subjective conscious states?
Right. So what you're saying is that matter itself can't formulate into something that's immaterial,
Like conscious
consciousness,
states,
for
like
example.
inner subjective experience. But what some philosophies of the mind do is that they just ignore, they just say our conscious states, our inner subjective conscious states are illusory. Basically, they don't exist.
Right.
So they ignore that which requires explaining in the first place. And there's something called type B materialism, type C materialism, there's type D dualism, there's type E dualism, there's type F panpsychism. There are so many different philosophies that try to explain consciousness and the inner subjective experience from a materialistic or non-materialistic perspective. But it's very complex to discuss in a few minutes. But the point I want to raise for people to investigate further is is that when we analyze all of the competing worldviews to explain the inner subjective experience, you can't explain them. Like, for example, I had a debate recently with Professor Peter Simons from Trinity College.
Yes.
And I articulated all of this, and he agreed with me. He said, yes, nothing is really explaining the fact that we have inner subjective conscious experience, what it is like for Hamza to eat a strawberry. So from this perspective, I would argue theism of God's existence best explains this, because if you had an all-aware being that created the material universe, then it follows that it created human beings with this conscious experience, or this ability to have an inner conscious awareness or inner conscious experience.
Sure.
If you didn't have an all-aware being and you just had dry, cold physical matter, then how on earth would you have inner subjective conscious states? It's impossible.
So I guess what you're saying is that, from our perspective, what we're saying is that the best explanation to consciousness, or the existence of consciousness, is the divine reality, because
God,
because
of
the
course.
material sum of the universe doesn't explain, or matter doesn't explain, an immaterial state coming into existence out of nothing, pretty much.
Yeah, to summarize this, you even have reductionists and materialists like Christoph Koch. He basically says that we may not be able to answer the question about the inner subjective experiences. You have the researchers like Ned Block. He says we have zero worthy of a research program.
Yes.
Researchers are stumped.
I guess that's a good place to conclude. Jazakallah khair for your time. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.